Well, welcome to Nina Tran. She hails out of California. Last year, Nina was our keynote speaker and wowed us. And this has been our year of pointy things. And so, Nina, who has really established herself as one of our foremost pointed pen teachers here in the US, she's going to be on the faculty of IAMPATH this summer. We're just delighted to have seen her career progression because she's been growing along with us here at Colleagues of Calligraphy. And she has great practical, technical knowledge that she explains extremely well. So, welcome, Nina. It's lovely to have you back. And we look forward to seeing you again.
Welcome to, or welcome back if you're coming back for a second time or a third time like me. It's a pleasure for me to be a part of Maker University, and I hope that it will continue on and that I can be a part of it, either as a student or as a teacher in the coming years. So thank you so much for having me again for a third time. I have a very, very, very short presentation. Usually my presentations are really long, but I'm going to keep this to 2 minutes. So this is a very small segment of this Copper Plate Bootcamp. Minuscule's Oval Bootcamp edition is really just a small segment of a larger bootcamp session that is usually 8 hours long, but we have just 1 hour to do this small part, which I feel like is actually probably the most important part of the boot camp itself. If you are going to follow along, these are some of the materials that I will be using. I'm going to be using a flexible pointed pen. My go-to tool happens to be the Hunt 101 because I can make really thick strokes or really thick shades with those, but you could really use whatever tool that you have. I also prefer to work with an oblique pen holder, but if you want to work with a straight pen holder, that's up to you. You use the tool that gives you the best results. And for practice work, I typically encourage using dark colored ink. That way you could really see your strokes versus working with yellow or gold or something like that. If you were in Anne's class earlier, she was talking about the Borden and Riley, and the old Boris marker layout paper was really great, but for some reason, the newer stuff, there's a front side and a back side. And if you open up your pad and you write on the front side, it's going to bleed. And so you have to flip it over to the other side. And I don't know what they're doing differently. But you have the Borden and Riley paper and you're noticing that it's bleeding, don't throw it out. Flip the page over and see if it takes ink better on the other side. I also almost always have a mechanical pencil and eraser next to me, along with a ruler. It's just kind of part of our toolbox as calligraphers. And if you are an avid note taker like me and like to work in different colors, you can bust out your colored pencils or gel pens. I happen to really like these Sarasa gel pens for note taking and monoline work. And since we're working with ink, it's good to have a container of clean water and some paper towels. And if you are going to slip your marker, slip guide sheets under your marker layout paper, it's good to secure them with some paper clips. And I have removable tape here because I'm using it, but you may not need it because I won't be able to really go into what I use that for, but I will show you what I'm using it for. Hopefully you had a chance to print out this one-page handout. I do apologize, some of my letters are not exactly on the lines. Yeah, that's just my hand doing its own thing. But these are the drills that we're going to be doing today, and there are many, many more drills, but these are the ones that are oval centric. And I also provided you with 10mm guide sheets, which is really massive uh, for writing pointed pen scripts, but I feel that it's a really good size so that you could see your ovals very clearly because they're really, really big. But if that's too big for you and you want to work a little bit smaller, you can try for 9mm or 8mm. 7 millimeters might be the smallest X height that I would use for this kind of practice. And with that, that is it. Pointed pen, especially if you're wanting to do an ovals drill that is specific to copper plate. Usually I'm sitting right over here, and this is my paper at in a horizontal position. And usually when I hold my pen this way. I hold it in a very conventional way that is it's resting on my middle finger, and it's kind of held in place by my index and my thumb. So I hold it this way. And sometimes I hold it a little bit flat, and other times I hold it a little bit high. So it just really depends on what I'm doing, what I'm feeling. It also depends on how snaggy my point is. Sometimes, if I'm working on extra snaggy paper, I might hold my pen a little bit lower. It just really depends. So sometimes you'll see me hold my pen a little bit more upright, where the point is not pointing directly towards my shoulder, but pointing to the right. And other times I'll hold it a little bit lower so that the point is pointing towards my shoulder. So you just have to find the position of the pen that works best for you. So when you're writing with a pointed pen, usually you want to align your nib with the slant of your paper. And so I'm going to just draw a red mark here to mark the slant of my paper. And usually what you want to do is you want to turn your paper so that the nib on your pen aligns with that slant so that they're parallel. So usually when you're writing copper plate, you wouldn't write this way, where your paper is perpendicular to you. Usually it's on a slant. And I mentioned the use of washi tape. I already know where my writing zone is, and so I always have this sheet of paper, which is it has two purposes. This acts as a guard sheet, and it also keeps me in my writing zone. So I just tape this longer sheet of paper. Usually it's longer than my actual sheet of paper, and it's always fastened at my desk when I'm writing, and then I just slip my writing paper underneath, and little ink marks. But usually when I'm writing, my hand is in this position, and as I write a few letters, and then I use my non-writing hand to shift my paper, write a couple more strokes, shift my paper. So my hand is almost always staying here in this position as I'm writing. And it's my paper that is moving as I write. So this keeps me in this keeps my pen in this right angle, and it also keeps me in a comfortable position, because otherwise, if you happen to keep your paper here and you swipe your arm across the page, what happens is that by the time you get to the end of the page, your nib will be misaligned with the slant of your paper. Just going to ask somebody to mute their microphone. Okay, stopped. So as you're writing, it's really important to stay in your writing zone. And another important thing is to have support as you're writing, because you want to be able to rest your forearm on the table. So you don't want to write with your arm hanging out and it's kind of loose and you're just writing basically with your wrist on the table. That's not good either. So if you write, you don't want to swipe your arm across the page. And you also don't want to move your hand so that by the time you get to the end of the page, you don't have that support, that arm support. So make sure that if you don't have this set guard sheet on your table, that you somehow try to keep your hand here as you write and move your paper instead. So that is what the washi tape is for, and that is what this sheet is for. Okay, I'm going to move you down here now. And so now that you know the position of my paper, I'm going to turn my camera this way so that you can see my letters in a kind of uprightish position, but just know that I am writing with a slant. With copperplate, there are many different variations that you can adopt, and usually the standard copperplate uses 6 lines, 6 equidistant lines, but in this case, I'm going to use a very simple copper plate ratio. So I'm just going to be using 4 lines. If we even get to the 4 lines, we might just end up using 2 lines. But we have these 4 equidistant lines, these 2 middle ones. This one here is the baseline, and above that we have the waistline, and the space between the waistline and the baseline is the X height. And then we have just one acenter line for this particular ratio, which is a 1:1:1 ratio, meaning you have one space for your acenter, one space for your X height, and one space for your descender. So that's what that ratio is. So these are the lines I'm going to be using. I also have this 5th line here, this red line that I made earlier, which is a 55-degree slant. And copper plate is generally, standardly speaking, written at a 55-degree slant, but you could really write it more slanted if you want, or a little bit more upright. It's really up to you. Okay, so these are the lines that we're going to be using. And so I mentioned earlier that this boot camp is really just a small part of a larger boot camp, but I feel like it's the most important part. And why is the most important part of the boot camp? It is because the oval is present in so many letters. And I have here, you also have it in your handout here at the bottom, which you can color in with me if you want to. But what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to just kind of color code some of the letters, or all of the letters that have these ovals. And the ovals that I'm going to be talking about today in the bootcamp are full or closed ovals, open ovals, and half ovals. So I'm going to just zoom in a little bit more, and I'm going to start with the full oval. So just going from A to Z, I'm just going to start here. This A is a closed oval or a full oval. So I'm just going to go ahead and color that in. B has a half oval here at the bottom, or maybe even just a 3/4 of an oval, but I'm just going to call it half to keep it simple. And the C here, you can see that it's kind of a full oval, but it's just missing this closing stroke here. So I'm going to just color this yellow because this is an open oval. D is closed oval. And this part of the D here, just like the B, has a half oval. And the E also has an open oval. And the F doesn't really have an oval per se, but we won't be doing this particular drill, but there is a drill that that helps us to determine the width of this loop. And it just so happens that the width of that loop is more or less equal to the width of the oval, the negative space of the oval. So that's how that's related. So I won't color that in. But if we just keep going, we can just very quickly take a look at where all of these ovals are. So the H here has a half oval. If we're looking at these letters in a very theoretical, sciencey way, but we know that probably the oval is really mostly just here at the top. But for the sake of simplicity, I'm just going to call it a half oval. So here's another half. The I has a half oval here. The J doesn't really have it, but we know that this is the same width as the negative space there. The K, this would be, if this were complete, this would also be a half oval here, but it's not complete, so I won't mark that. I'll just mark that part though, and this. And this part of the M is also a half oval, but it's been compressed. It's a little bit tighter in order to bring these two letters closer together. Here is another half oval. And same thing here for this part of the M and this part of the N. These ovals have been compressed so that we can bring these two letters closer together. Otherwise, you'd have a really wide gap between the N and the M and the L and the M. And an important thing to note here is when you are compressing, typically you would compress you would compress the letter, the part of the letter that is not part of the letter, if you know what I mean. So in the letter M, this is part of the letter M. This is what makes the M. So these inner counter spaces, we don't compress those, but these outer ones here and here, those can be compressed because they're outside of the actual letter M itself. And same thing for the L. The letter L is here. So we try to not compress this part, but we can compress this connective part between the L and the M. But the parts of the letters that have ovals that are an integral part of the letter, we try to keep that same oval shape or oval space, oval width. Okay, so I'm just going to continue on here. This is another one. I'll just go a little bit faster. Here's a very obvious closed oval on the O. The P looks like it's a closed oval, and it could certainly be, but because it's here with a terminal dot, I'm going to categorize it as an open oval, like the C and the E. But the point of doing this whole thing of coloring these things is so that you see where the ovals are, and you can also start to categorize them yourself. So here in this particular part of the R, this is also an oval, but it's compressed because it's not really the essential part of the R. The essential part of the R is here. This is a full R. And this is a half R, and the half R here has that half oval. And if the half R, if this part were to be continuous, this part of the R here is the same as this stroke on the N, only we've modified this part to turn it into an R. Okay, moving on to the S. So the S is, well, it's closed in this particular case, but I'm going to categorize this as an open oval, just like the C and the E. But you can see that the actual S itself doesn't occupy the whole oval. And the T, just moving right along, we've got a half oval here. U, two half ovals, although this part here can be compressed depending on what it's attached to. Same thing for here, this could be compressed, but the inside of the V has to maintain that same oval width. So here, more half ovals. And this particular X has a half oval here and a half oval here, whereas this version of the X has two open ovals. Okay, so I think by this time, since we're so near the end, you can see how the oval influences or dictates the shape of all of these letters. It's in there somewhere, even in letters like the F or the J, where it's like, where's the oval there? But the oval influences the shape or the width of those loops. So that's just a visual of where all of those ovals are. Okay, so now we're going to start actually writing. The first thing that I want to talk about is what is the size of the oval that we should write. And after this, I will scan all of these things that I'm writing, and I will send it over to Anne and Sally, and I'm more than happy to share it with you. Okay, so going back to this sheet, I'm going to zoom in here. Okay. So when it comes to the copper plate oval, there is a standard size, just like pretty much in any formal script, there's always a standard form. And even though there are standard forms, standards can still vary from instructor to instructor, from book to book. And I think it's wonderful. However, if you're new, when you're just starting it can be really confusing, to see what one teacher does. So there's actually a range. So instead of thinking too much about a standard, just think about a range of ovals that you can do. So you can have one that is relatively narrow. I don't know that I would go too narrow because then it would be probably too difficult to write. And probably the narrowest that I would go is this, where you can fit two circles inside of your oval. And I don't know that I would go much narrower, at least not for this particular exercise. But you could go a little bit wider if you want, if you prefer something a little bit more round. You can do it that way. I don't know that I would make it too circular. You could probably do something that's a lot rounder as well. But I would stick to something that is like this, that's not too narrow, not too wide. This might be a little bit on the wide side. But what you don't want to do is you don't want to make circles or flat ovals that are more horizontal. And the reason why we want to avoid these shapes is that this particular tool behaves in a particular way. And it's so particular, in fact, that when you're just writing with it, without any pressure, you can go up and down, side to side. You can move any which way that you want. Once you apply pressure, you can no longer move to the left. You can't go to the right. You certainly can't go up. You can really only go down. And so it's very difficult to use a pointed pen to go to the left unless you're going in a downward left motion or a downward but also to the right motion. That's probably the only way to go to the left and to the right is in a downward movement. But even then, once you apply pressure and you start making strokes like this, going to the right, you're going to get very jagged edges. So same here. Maybe everything is fine when you're going down, but as soon as you start moving to the right, your pen starts to drag. And the reason for that is because when your pressure is applied, you have your tines, the 2 points that are split open now, are quite literally piercing the paper. Maybe not piercing through, but they are pressing against the paper like a needle. And so once it's pressing against the needle, really the only movement you can make is downward. And so when you have a circle, let me just blot these out. When you have a circle shape, look at all this curve that you have to cover. So basically from this point here to this point, it's a curve. And so you can't really make the shade stroke going in this direction and going in this direction. You can only make it when you're going in a downward stroke, downward part. And because you're not able to really pull a shade going to the left or pull a shade going to the right, your shade becomes really short. Whereas if you make an oval that is slanted at your 55-degree slant, you can start your shade higher and you can end it lower and you get a much taller, a much longer shade. And so when you have a letter like an A, for instance, versus an A that is circular, okay, let's say that's our A. I'm going to blot it so I can write on top of it. Okay, so when I make an A that is in this oval shape, my shades are more or less about the same height. If I make rounder shapes, my oval here, my shade is this long, but my other shades might be a little bit taller. And so I have this incongruency between the heights of my shade because I use rounder shapes. And so when using a pointed pen, we are kind of forced by the tool to adopt a more compressed oval shape rather than a rounder form, as opposed to working with broad edge, where you can make things, you can make round shapes like for foundational, say, or unshaw, right? But with a pointed pen, it tends to be a little bit more challenging, especially if you want really uniform strokes. Okay. All right. So that is the oval. As far as the shape goes or the size goes, you can really have narrower ones or slightly rounder ones, but I don't know that I would probably avoid ones that are too round, especially when you start getting shades that are short. All right. Another thing about the oval is that the oval is, in theory, if we take a look at the oval shape is this. So this is what you would call a direct oval, where your shade, well, first of all, you make this oval in a counterclockwise movement, and your shade is on the left side. Now, if you made the same oval, but you went in a counterclockwise movement, your shade would be on the opposite side. So you have two kinds of ovals. You have your direct oval, which is the red one, and you have your indirect oval, which is this yellow one. But essentially, they're the same. Well, in theory, they're the same shape, same width, same everything. They're just going in opposite directions, and the shades are just on different sides. Okay, so this would be one of the first parent strokes. These are parent ovals. So here you have your direct and you have your indirect. And another parent stroke is a straight stroke. And sometimes that straight stroke is just a hairline. And sometimes that straight stroke is a thick stroke or a shaded stroke. So that is this another parent stroke. This is just a straight. And your straight stroke is almost always at 55 degrees unless otherwise noted. And here I mentioned that there's a hairline stroke. There's also a hairline stroke in the ovals that we don't really mention, but it's here in the indirect oval, and it's here in the direct oval. So we have also hairlines in the oval form. If we just pull it out from here and pull it out from here, we can get also a hairline oval. So these are the parent strokes, and from these parent strokes, you can derive all of the strokes. And I'm just going to go through these very quickly. But if you take an oval, so this is a direct oval, and you just take this half of the direct oval, and you actually start with a straight stroke going about halfway, and then from the halfway on, you continued on with a direct oval, you get an underturn stroke. Okay. If you take um, the indirect oval and you just take the top part and you add that top part, or you add a straight stroke under that, you get the overturn stroke. And if you combine the overturn and the underturn, which we now know have these oval parts here and here, we get another basic stroke, which is the double turn or compound curve, sometimes it's called. So just a quick review of these basic strokes one more time before we start our drill. So we have our oval, we have our indirect oval. We also get all of our hairlines from these ovals. We have our hairline straight stroke, and we have our shaded straight stroke. We have our underturn, which is an oval at the bottom. We have our overturn, which is an oval at the top. And then we have a fusion of these two, which creates our double turn. So an important thing here is that because the oval is in all of these strokes, that means that the oval width here and the oval width here is equal. And this also maintains that oval width. So as you're writing, you don't want to write letters where, okay, when you have an oval and your oval is the perfect size, and then when you get to the you get to the other part of the other letters, you stop maintaining that oval width. Everything gets narrow. So this is one thing that you don't want to do. You want to maintain your oval width, whatever width it is, whether it's narrow or wide. You just want to maintain your oval width as you're writing. And we won't really talk right now about compressing parts of the letters, but you can, as I mentioned, you can compress these parts later to bring those two letters together. But for now, you really want to just maintain that oval width throughout all of these strokes, because all of these strokes have an oval, have the influence of the oval. Okay, all right. Another thing, I thought that we were ready to do some drills, but another thing that you need to, that might be important, is the way that you hold your pen. So if you drew a straight line along a 55-degree slant, and if you place your pen on that slant, and it's neither turned to the left or to the right, it's kind of just flat, and you apply pressure, what happens is that both of your tines will split open. Okay, so if you place your pen on the paper and you apply pressure, both tines will split open from the red line. If your pen is turned slightly to the left and you apply pressure, only the right tine will slide open. And if you turn your pen slightly to the right, and you place your pen on the red line and you apply pressure, only the left one opens. And this is actually the way that we want to hold the pen. We want to hold the pen slightly turned to the right, because we want to be able to control which tine is opening. And this is really important because when we are drawing the oval, or when we are writing an oval, the oval actually, when it's monoline, it only has one shape. But when we add a shade into the oval, when we put thick stroke in there, it actually has two shapes now. So right here, in this particular example, there's just one shape. But here, we have two shapes. We have the inner oval shape, and we have the outer oval shape. And you can control how these strokes are made. And so a common issue, a common mistake when doing pointed pen is to follow the outer shape. So let's say that this is the oval that you want. And sometimes the problem is that when you're making your oval, you follow this really wide oval shape, which means that when you apply pressure, your shade is going to be on the outside. So your shade ends up being here. And so you get an oval shape that looks like this. Where you have this perfect oval on the inside, but you've got kind of a really round shape on the outside. And, it's not wrong, but I think that especially if you're practicing in grosser script or a really, really formal style of copperplate, we actually want to reverse that. Instead, what you want to do is you want to make a slightly curved shape as you go down, and then you want to push up a really round shape on the outer side. So it's flat flatter on the left side as you pull down, because when you apply pressure, the left tine is going to fill that space. So when you apply pressure, it gets filled here to make the outer shape of the oval round. And so you get this shape instead, or this is what we're going to aim for. Okay, so our aim is to pull down a flatter curved shape and then a rounder right shape. And when we apply pressure, this missing part gets filled with the pressure. Okay, so this is the oval that we want. We want the oval shape to be on the outside, and we're going to have a flatter shape on the inside. Okay, all right, we are now ready to do some drills. All right, so when you start your drills, you always want to start your ovals. Always, always, always start your ovals on the waistline. And the reason for that is if you start your oval here for the letter E, you start your oval in the middle. And then maybe for the C, you start with a dot and then you make your C. And then maybe for the A, you start in the middle again and you push out a stroke. Maybe for the O, you also start kind of 3/4 of the way where your dot would be. So what you've done is you've made the same oval shape, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 shapes, or really 4. And you've done that same shape 4 different ways. And unless you are really skilled already as a calligrapher, you can do that, and no matter what you do, you get the same oval shapes. But if you really are aiming for consistency, start your oval at the waistline every time. So even your E, your C, your O, your A.
Going off page, Nina.
Oh, thank you.
Or off screen.
Okay, and then you go back and you fill in the parts that make it a C or an E. And what you get is because you started these ovals at the same spot every single time, you have that rhythmic writing, which is actually kind of part of the copperplate experience, is the rhythmic writing. So start your ovals at the same place every time, and you will, sure enough, gain more consistent letters just by doing that. Okay, all right, on to the drills for real. I have about 20 more minutes, so I'm gonna go through these drills, and I'm going to go through them kind of quickly, but really it takes a lot of time, and you could spend probably just a whole day doing one drill. But the most important thing is that after you do drills, you need to put them back in the letters and test it out. So while drills are excellent, we can't forget about the letters themselves, but it is a lot of fun to kind of sharpen our skills by doing these drills. Okay, so first drill of the day is the oval. And we're going to start at the waistline. And when you start with a very short hairline and then begin to gradually apply pressure, and make sure that you release pressure before you reach the baseline. And then you push up. And your ovals might be a little bit wonky at first. You might have some different sizes. You might accidentally miss hitting that waistline and that baseline. You might have more kind of triangular thick shapes. And the whole idea of doing a drill is to practice getting it right. And so don't worry if your first ones are not so good. Maybe by the 4th or 5th or 10th one, it gets better. And the idea is to just improve it one bit at a time. And so if it's too narrow, go ahead and try to make it a little bit wider. Just avoid applying pressure right from the beginning. or else you're going to get a really heavy stroke like this.
Off screen.
Thank you. Sorry.
You're welcome. And it's 11:27.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
So I'm just going to do a couple more. And another thing that you want to avoid is you want to avoid overlapping your strokes. So when you're making these strokes, try not to make it too close. But if you do make it too close, notice what happens. What happens is you actually lose this oval space. And your oval space, instead of being an oval width, it's going to be probably 3/4 of an oval width. So avoid overlapping your strokes. And another reason why you want to avoid overlapping your strokes is you get these very angular parts in the letter. So if you're making a letter A and your strokes are just barely touching each other or barely kissing each other like that, you get a nice smooth curve here. Whereas when you start overlapping strokes, like what I'm about to do right now here, overlapping, you get these angular corners in your letters, which are not very elegant. So I just want to practice kissing the strokes. Okay, so now we've just done the closed oval drills, closed oval kissing drills. Where you've got just ovals barely touching each other like this. They're just respecting each other's space. And what I want to do now is the second drill. In the second drill, we are going to alternate between open oval and closed oval. So the closed oval, we already know very well. We start from the waistline and we follow through with the oval all the way until we get to the top and we close it. For the open oval, we're going to start at the same place, same way. We're going to just kiss that previous oval. We're going to pretend as if we're going to make a full oval, but we're going to stop halfway up. So now we're going to continue on with this drill, alternating between closed oval and open oval. Okay. Closed oval, open oval. Again, you want to avoid overlapping. And you also want to make sure that all of your shades are parallel to that 55-degree slant, and that you're also maintaining that oval width inside the closed oval and inside of the open oval. So you could probably see that there's a letter A in here, and so you could very easily turn this letter into an A simply by making your closed oval. And here, instead of starting your oval, you just apply pressure so that you get a squared stroke, which is kind of a drill by itself. And you get your letter A. So essentially, this open oval, if you were to close it, if you were to fill that little triangular spot, you would get this kind of underturn, or it is an underturn shape. Okay, and that is drill number 2. Drill number 3, we are going to do a closed oval followed by 3 open ovals. So as you make these open ovals, you want to keep in mind the same things that we've been doing. Avoid overlapping. Keep them all the same oval width. Let's do a few sets of these. And I'll show you a really cool trick that I learned from Dr. Joe Vitolo, who happens to be a copper plate expert. And this is something that you could try yourself. So once you've drawn a series of closed ovals and open ovals, you take a straight edge piece of paper or ruler and you cover the top part, the top half. And what happens when you cover the top half is that you should not be able to determine which ones are open ovals and which ones are closed ovals. All these turns should be identical. So that's a really cool tip. So now let's go ahead and finish this drill. So I call this the ACE drill. And the reason for that is we're going to turn these two open ovals into C's and E's. So the first one, I'm just going to draw a closed oval next to it for reference. So this first one here, or last one, I guess I should say, if we divide this space in half along the 55-degree slant, and we divide it in half again, halfway between the waistline and the baseline, we divide the space into basically 4 quadrants. And we want to, if we want to turn this into an E, we need to place our pen back into the shade, push up along the hairline, and draw a loop. And our loop is contained, or is the same width as that quadrant. So this loop takes up a quarter of the oval space. So that's the letter E. Next, we're going to turn this next open oval into a letter C. And if we just imagine that this is a closed oval here, we're going to do the same thing we did for the E. Go back into the wet ink, push up along that hairline, and what we're going to do is we're just going to draw a tiny little teardrop at the top. I'm going to leave it open, but what you want to do is you actually want to fill that that little teardrop. So I'm going to draw another E here, just going backwards. Usually when I'm filling in these parts of the letters, I work my way from right to left. And yeah, you have to kind of double check your spelling and get really good at remembering which ones are C's and which ones are E's. But here's a filled one. And I just keep it nice and simple. I keep it relatively high, although you could have it droop down a little bit more, but I find it's more elegant when it's like this. Okay, so that's the ACE drill. And I have about 10 more minutes, and I'm going to do just one more drill, two more really, really quick ones, and then I will take your questions if you have any. And if there aren't any, then I will just continue on with the drill. So just give me one more minute for this next two drills. This next one is a little bit harder, and it is the indirect oval kissing drills. So this one is always a little bit tougher. And unlike the first drill, the first oval, I should say, where we started with a flatter curve and then a more round curve on the upstroke, for this particular kind of drill, we're actually going to draw a very round oval. And when we apply pressure, the pressure we apply fills the shade on the inside. So unlike making a direct oval, when we make a direct oval, our movement might be a little bit narrower. And when we make indirect ovals, we make it a little bit fuller. So this is a reverse kissing oval or indirect kissing oval. And when you make your first one, you place your pen not inside, but on the outer right side. So when you make this next oval, you place your pen right here on the outer side and you push out, you branch out, and you make your next oval. And then here, it's not really necessary to go all the way and close it unless you want to. Probably a better exercise is to push out and end with a little teardrop shape, which you will fill in. So push out from the middle, branch out, and with a little teardrop. I always draw the teardrop first and then I fill it in because then I can control the shape and the size before filling it in. Whereas if you kind of fill it in on the spot without drawing it first, you might start with a little one, and as you continue to fix it, because the shape is not right, it might just grow and grow and grow until it's a massive blob. Okay, so that's the one drill where you do these indirect ovals, but really what we're going for here is this shape here. So we're going to start at the baseline. We're going to push up a straight line, and then we're going to draw our indirect oval terminating with a terminal dot. And right next to that, we're going to pull a direct oval, but this time we're not going to apply pressure. And it's going to be relatively, it's not going to be very curved. So don't do this where it's too curved. Instead, what you want to do is you want to draw the same curve as the inner oval. So remember here, this inner oval, see how flat that curve is? That's how flat we want to pull this next stroke. So this next stroke, it's going to be just a flat curve. And then we're going to draw this connective stroke, going back out and drawing another indirect oval with the terminal dot. And we're just going to repeat this. So now we've just drawn an X. And even though this part is flatter, it actually matches the flatter curve on the inside of these strokes. It's really only curvy on the outer side. And to finish off these X's, just like the E, once we're done writing the letter, we go back, we branch or we push out from the hairline, draw a little teardrop, and fill it. Okay. Are there any questions?
Please feel free to unmute and ask questions.
If there are no questions, I will continue on with the drills, but please just interrupt me anytime.
I
Okay.
think people want to just see you write.
Okay.
Nina, I have one question. Hi,
Yes.
Sharmila here.
Hi.
Hi. So for the oval, you start at the top, kind of a center point. When we do the reverse oval, what is your starting point if you're doing the full oval?
So there actually is no full oval that is, if we look at these letters,
Mm-hmm.
all the full ovals that we ever have to do are closed.
Mm-hmm.
The only time that we use the indirect oval, like the one that we're doing right now, is here on the P, here on the S, and here on the X, and here on the Z. So it's always open.
Got it.
Yeah, so you never need to go all the way up. And so you're asking, where do I start?
Yes.
Okay. If I am starting the letter, if it's at the beginning of a word, let's say we're going to write X-ray or something like that, I'm going to start from the baseline. And I start not with a curve, but I start with a straight line parallel to the 55-degree slant. And then I continue on with my indirect oval. And then I'm just going to finish my X. If I am drawing a P, so a P, you can have a P that has a full pressure stroke like this, just a straight line. And for the P, I'm going to start my stroke halfway between the waistline and the baseline. So right here, I'm going to start, and I'm going to just run along and branch out along the side. And my exit stroke is just going to go right underneath.
That's very helpful. Thank you, Nina.
Okay, great question. This is a great example of me filling the blob in as I go, and it's just getting bigger. And if this is big, then I need to make everything big. That's kind of the secret to make it seem like you intended to do that. Okay, any other questions? I'll do that one last drill on the page, which is the AXE drill. And for this, we're going to start with our closed oval. And I'm just going to make this an open oval because I'm not ready to turn this into a full pressure stroke yet. So maybe I'll do that later. So once you draw your A, here about halfway, I'm going to transition into my indirect oval. And then I'm going to draw a flatter curve on the inside here. But it's an open oval. And then I'm going to draw an open oval for my E. And I'm just really trying to maintain that open oval or that oval space through and through as I do this drill. So I'm going to repeat closed oval, open oval, transitioning into an indirect oval with a terminal dot at the bottom. And you repeat. And then it's really important not to stab your letters or to overlap. So avoid overlapping like this. Always go back and do these, add the letters later. But notice what happens when I overlap here. There is, where the X and the E overlap, there's this point. It's a kind of an angular point. Same thing here on the E where I overlap the oval. I get this point and I lose the oval shape. Whereas if you just have them kissing, you're just barely touching. You always have this nice, smooth join from one letter to the next letter. Okay. And I think my time is up, but I'm happy to stick around if there are questions.
Nina,
Yes.
what pen point were you using?
I am using a Hunt 101.
That was a Hunt what?
Hunt 101.
Okay,
101, yeah.
thank you.
You're welcome.
How far do you push the nib into the holder? Do you want it real flexible or do you want it real solid? Do you know what I mean?
Yes, you want it really in there so that it's not moving. A general rule that I learned from Chris Yoke is here's my ruler. Oh, I guess I need a background. Or maybe I'll just draw a line so that you can see it. Okay, so you have a line. And ideally, if you're using an oblique pen holder, you want the center, the axis of the pen. If you place the center of the pen along that line, you ideally want your point to be in alignment with that axis. So if it's like this, that is not so good. And if it's always want to handle these carefully. If it's just barely in there, it'll be pretty loose, and you see it's poking out past the axis.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. That's a great question, actually.